start with Mike talking about his tree briefly, what he's wanting to do with it, what he's already started to do with it, and then we'll move to Eric and Jason, and then we're going to let them go to work, and we'll individually bother each of them every once in a while to ask them how things are going.
Awesome.
So Mike, go ahead.
All right, well, hello everybody. Thank you for tuning in with us today. The tree I chose is a Hollywood juniper, Juniperus torulusa. It's not commonly used in bonsai, and that's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to work with it as well. It was an interesting piece of material, had a large piece of deadwood. The original trunk had died back and left a smaller trunk to the back. And so what we're going to do today is shatamiki, or deadwood design, driftwood style. And so because of the time constraints, while I had this tree at my house for the last couple of weeks, over the weekend, I started to do some carving with some various chisels and hammers. And one of the things I try to do is keep everything with the grain of the wood. So I don't want to cross the grain. So a lot of it is just ripping fibers down and kind of pulling to expose grain. The other thing I did before the demo was to try and clean the bark off of my juniper. With junipers, one of the aesthetics that's really, really popular is to polish the live section of the tree to a reddish color and then to lime sulfur the deadwood white, which increased contrast in the design, which in deadwood designs is really, really important to show clearly what is alive and what is dead. So I've worked through that already. The next step is going to be kind of removing some of the branches we don't need. And I'm going to start to apply some wire and hopefully start to shape out some pads and some initial branch structure. So that's going to be what I'm working on today with the juniper. And yeah, so that's it.
Thank you, Mike.
No worries.
All right, Eric. Okay, so the tree that I have to work on this morning is a Caliandra, or powder puff. This variety is kind of a newer variety for bonsai. You don't see it as often yet. It's called Caliandra tweedii. It has a little bit larger leaf than a few of the cultivars that we grow, but the leaves do reduce on it quite nicely when you're working it. Also has a very showy, nice red flower, as you can see. So this was a stock plant that I grew out for about 6 years. It was in a larger pot, and I allowed it to root into the ground. So it has a really large caliper for the species. That's why I selected this, because it was a unique variety and a nice large caliper to work with. So the first thing that I'm going to be doing this morning is just real quick, I'll be removing some of the leaves on the interior portion and some of the branches that I'm going to keep. Then, of course, I'll go through selecting branches that will be kept for the design and talking a little bit about the options of the tree. But I'll be taking some of the leaves off. Some of the flowers will be going also. But I figured this would give you guys a nice tropical to have the chance to get today and something you wouldn't typically see. So thank you.
Thank you. Talk to us, Jason, about your tree.
Hi guys. Thanks for tuning in. I am very, very grateful to be here, and it's kind of exciting to have Eric styling a tree next to us. We used to do this all the time, and we just get busy. So I appreciate the opportunity. And Mike, you know, Mike's like the whipped cream and the cherry on top of the sundae. So, you know, I like pines, and so, you know, I chose this pine. This tree here came from Mississippi a couple years ago on a trip that Eric had taken, and I thought that it was had some good structure and some good bones to start its journey. I kind of this was supposed to happen last year, but it kind of gave me an opportunity to acclimate the tree a little bit to Florida. So I feel good about that. Obviously, it's been very healthy. This tree was cut back in June, and you know, some of these interior branches have run. I didn't touch these two in the summertime. but it's very vigorous. It's very happy. It's had a good regimen of miticide and fungicide over the last couple of years. So I feel pretty good about it. One thing that I thought is interesting is this was done in using the technique where they coil the wire around the trunk, and it developed this very large, like bulbous kind of a area of tissue that has calloused and grown over and rolled over. It had some sacrifice branches to thicken the trunk that were removed prior to coming to Florida. So I think that this right here is going to have to be dealt with. I think we should carve some of this out and start dealing with that. But that's something that we can always do down the road. So you can see it's got lots of choices. That's what we want to choose. When we're choosing material, we want to have a lot of options, okay? So the thicker, longer branches are going to be removed today. And we'll go ahead and try to set the main structure. My opinion, I think this is at least a 5-year project. All right. So the next step for this tree will be to start to look at the roots. Maybe we skip one more year, or maybe we go ahead, depending on how it recovers after this stage, we can start to work on reducing the root ball a little bit and deal with that. It is healthy. It uses a lot of water. This is a water every day. Saturated, and it dries out every day, even in the organic soil. So it likes the depth, it likes the drainage, and if we can keep it from getting bugs and needle cast, that's half the battle right there. So that's what I got so far. So I'm gonna start cutting this guy back and
Bruce, lie down. Lie down.
we are a little bit early on pine work that I would normally do by just a couple weeks. But this is a good time to make some hard cuts. You know, I went ahead and removed, you know, probably a nickel diameter branch. And you can see what I'm going to do here is I'm going to stub that, and I'm going to clear that tissue away from that stub. And then we'll seal the outer portion of the stub with some paste. And I'm not going to leave that. That will be, we will try to promote some healing on that scar there. And same way with this top section. A lot of nice back budding already happening in here. So as of late, I have kind of changed some of the ways that I have been styling trees. I tend to have multiple choices for apex on a lot of the material that I've been growing, because I made quite a few mistakes when I started to you know, learn this hobby. So this has a lot of choices.
Welcome to the club.
So we're gonna leave ourselves some choices and see how the tree develops after some of these stubs. But these guys are too thick to really do anything with, especially when I have so many choices for young and tender branches that I can set the structure of this tree.
Okay, let's shift, if we can, back over to Mike, and he seems to have angled it more in the direction that he might be looking at.
Yeah. So I did kind of find the line that I think I'm going to work with here by pitching the tree slightly, not too much. I'm kind of bringing the deadwood into a little more of an angle, kind of introducing some movement to the design instead of just a static upright tree. With the deadwood being so straight and the tree coming off of it with a contorted angle, it is kind of difficult to match the two. So by introducing a little bit of movement, a little bit of angle to that deadwood piece, I can kind of blend it a little bit better with the tree to the back. And now what my job is going to be is to frame this deadwood piece. Now, I'm going through some of these other deadwood sections that exist on this tree. There's a large one back here that I wasn't able to get to in the time I had this at my house. And all I'm doing is using, well, a root cutter, which technically I should have a trunk splitter. But if you see in here, I'm just stripping chunks off of the deadwood stump, and I'm just pulling to expose grain. So I'll keep doing that from different angles to kind of just make it look like a branch that broke off. When it comes to gin and deadwood, it's kind of the same with any other part of the tree. If it's not interesting, then you cut it off. So with long straight gin that don't have a lot of stubs or a lot of interest, I don't keep them long. I usually break them to a small kind of stub kind of look and make it look as rough as I possibly can to introduce some interest to the small piece of deadwood. So don't keep deadwood just to have deadwood on the tree. It should still be interesting and kind of have a purpose. So this is going to be the angle I'm going to hone in on. I'm going to start descending some branches into the pine tree or conifer style, which usually means that they're sweeping down before they then go out. Usually conifers, especially the ones we're trying to emulate, come from colder climates, and specifically the trees that we're emulating in deadwood style or driftwood style are mountain trees that have dealt with a lot of environmental stress. So the branches would not typically be up and out in those climates, and so we want to mimic that. We don't want to show branches that are growing in a pristine, unrestricted state where the trunk has looked battered and has obviously shown it's been fighting a long time. So we're looking for consistency more than anything. And one of the reasons I chose this difficult material, I'm going to try to get my nice Eric thing in real quick, is one of the reasons I chose this material is Eric, in the time that he's been teaching me, has always pushed me to not take the easy material. So whenever we used to have the open house out here, every year he'd kind of make me push myself a little further outside of my comfort zone. So specifically, I remember when, I think it was 2013, when I didn't want to do junipers. I was really, really scared of doing junipers. And Eric talked me into doing a juniper for that open house. And so I started learning about them and started making sure that I was comfortable by the time the open house came out. And that attitude has kind of persisted in the way that I also teach my students. So Eric has been a big influence, not just in the aesthetics, but in how to teach, you know, how to kind of grow, how to persist in the hobby. So we're very lucky to have had him as a teacher here.
Okay, Lindsay, we have one question that came in, and it was from an individual who said, I hope we can get a recording of this so that we can go back and go over it again. And each of the clubs will receive a recording, and you can check with your club president. In some cases, it might be put on the club website. In some cases, you may need to access it in some other way. But you should contact your club president as to how to access the recording of this event.
Another tree and put it down here.
It looks like Eric has, in his usual fast way, thinned things out. Let's see what he has. Let's see what he has to say now that he can see into the tree.
Okay, so as with, well, first before I talk about the design of this tree, let me just show you guys, talk a little bit about powder puffs in general. This is a variety that we have in good production here at the nursery. It's probably my favorite variety of powder puff to work with. I don't have any this size though. They're all smaller ones like this. I've got a few in the ground we'll be pulling in the next year or 2 years, but this is Caliandra schultzii, also called Rose Cascade. The reason this is my favorite is the tightness of the foliage, the back budding that it has, and the naturally small leaf size. Some of you who've been around a while may remember I used to have a very large Cascade bonsai of this variety that was in several shows, but this is by far my favorite. One thing that this Tweety Eye does when you grow it out that I don't like as well is it tends to get these knobby areas. If you allow it to just kind of grow unrestricted like this was in the ground, you'll get multiple buds from the same point and you'll get these whorls. Doesn't happen as much on this variety. And if you watch your buds and kind of control the tree as you're growing it, you can avoid that. You can see the newer branches don't have any of that, but there are some areas that we need to deal with today on this material as far as getting some of those reverse taper areas cleared out. So that's the one drawback I've seen with this species is left unattended, it will grow those kind of knobby whorls. Another variety that I'm excited about growing when it comes to the Calandra, and I should have them available in another year or two. The flowers are kind of gone, so you can't see them, but this is Calandra spinosa, which is a variety native to Brazil. You've probably, if you've been online, you may have seen photos of these as nice, larger caliper styled trees. Has an even smaller leaf size naturally than the Schultzii, very tiny, feather-like leaves, and very compact growth habit. So this one is maybe coming down the road. There's also another variety that we're currently out of. What's that one, Andrea? The other variety that we grow. What's that? No, that's the Schultzii. The one that we just took up. Do you remember? Yes, thank you, Lindsay. I should ask you, not my wife. Brevipes. That's another variety that we're currently out of that also has a very small leaf like this, native to Brazil. But the Spinosa is a newer one that hopefully we'll have in production pretty soon. I don't have a current good flower to show you, but a nice tiny flower. So in looking at this material, as I said, there's some areas that have gotten thick, like these larger limbs, and there's also some whorls where you've got a lot of stuff coming from one point, spots like this. So considering this material, first thing I'm going to think about is, of course, with the flowers and the showiness of the bloom, you know, there's reason to create a bigger tree and have something that would be a little bit larger to show off the flowers. We, of course, have to kind of keep in mind proportions when we have a trunk this size. Standard rule of thumb that you could say, you know, height should be about 6 times the trunk diameter. So I don't necessarily want to make a tree that's this tall, a very large tree. However, I'm not necessarily advocating that we need to make it a show hen. So some height would go well with the size of the trunk and also with the size of the bloom. Also, the more branches that we have, the more chance we have to create blooms. You can see these are pretty heavy in flowers. There's a ton of blooms that haven't opened. This thing's been blooming like this year round. Since we were initially going to have the event in the spring, it's been blooming nonstop. So it's a really good bloomer. But whenever I look at material of style, the things that I think about most are going to be movement and taper. Those are the most important things. So I don't want to just go up the trunk and go from point A to point B and say, you know, here's my tree, let's pad it out. I want to try and find a line in there that's going to give me some interesting movement, whether that includes an angle change and also some taper. One thing that I'm going to consider also is once I determine where the top's going to be, are these lower branches going to be too thick to use in the design? These are very large already because they've grown out, and they might be too heavy proportionately to the rest of the limbs we might select. So that's the first thing that I kind of run through my mind, and I already have an idea of where we're going to go with this in terms of getting the movement and taper. If I spin it towards Lindsay, you can see, looking up the trunk, first place you could get movement is down here, of course. If we cut off this whole top and we did something down here, maybe we tip it, we make semi-cascade, grow it out and do something interesting like that. We'd immediately have taper, we'd immediately have movement, which could be a really nice long-term design. It's not going to be there as quick, but it could be a very nice design for the tree. But taking that out of the equation, moving up the trunk, the first place to get movement is going to be at this fork. So when I look at that and I consider a taller tree, do I want my tree to go to this side to create movement or that side? Those are my two options. And when I'm going to try and determine between those two options, I look at what I have going up from there. In other words, this side, if I follow this path, I come into a pretty large area of reverse taper, some heavy limbs. Going the other way, I might have some better options in terms of picking an apex. It's not as congested. You see things are spaced out a little bit better. I still need to remove some heavy limbs, but I think I have more options on this side of the tree than I do over here. If you can see that zooming in, because this area is already kind of bulged out quite a bit. So at this point, what I'm going to do is go ahead and take this section out with the saw, get that out of the way. Then you guys will probably see a little bit better. I'll also block it up at the angle I'm thinking it's going to be at, and you can kind of see where I'm going with that. I don't know if there's any questions on the line while I'm at that stage before I cut that off.
Not with the line, but just a technical suggestion for some of you. If you're not getting the focus on the close-up camera, you might hop at your end for gallery view.
They figured it out.
Okay, most of you probably figured that out already, but Lindsay has wonderful close-up pictures.
Yeah, and these guys, we primarily grow them from seed at the nursery. Cuttings on Caliandra, and especially thicker wood, can be tough. So when we propagate these, we're looking mainly for seed. You could potentially air layer these, but you know, this for me is just garbage once I take it off, essentially. But I'm going to go ahead and get that cut off with the saw, get that out of the way, do some more cleanup, and then we can come back. And if anyone has questions, certainly interrupt me. I'll be happy to answer them. Okay.
Jason, this looks very different from the last time we saw it.
It does.
A lot of progress. You see a lot of limbs cut off here.
Right, so I wanna ask, you should be thinking about what that means for the aftercare of this particular tree.
I'm going to cut this for a
Okay.
second so it's making it loud. Sorry.
Yeah, so what's gonna happen now after we do go through this process, it'll be, this is gonna weaken the tree considerably, but this will also really reduce the amount of water that it's going to need. So this tree will need to go back out into full sun, and we will have to be careful that we don't overwater this particular tree until it starts to recover from this. But we're going to attempt to leave a lot of growth in the areas that we can use. All of this was sacrificial to a certain extent, but that's where a lot of the energy in this particular tree is at right now. So we're losing that. We need to be conscious of that in the aftercare with this particular tree. What I'm doing right now is I'm trying to get division. I'm trying to get it to down to 2 pairs in a lot of areas. So I'm trying to remove areas where there's more than two branches, and I want it to bifurcate as close to the trunk as I possibly can. So we're getting rid of long straight pieces that do not divide, and we're going to cut it back to buds that are closer to the trunk where we can get some division early on. And this tree has a lot of potential when it comes to developing the basic structure. So
Eric, we had one question coming in. Is this species a good or a bad candidate for carving?
Well, being a tropical, the wood is not going to be, or excuse me, being a powder puff, it's not going to be as hard as, say, a buttonwood, but it is on this old wood, pretty dense material. So you could certainly do some carving with it. With the flowering varieties, I would tend not to really put in a piece of deadwood such as a large gin on the top of that. However, if I were going to remove a large limb and it was a scar, this is a slower variety to roll over. So you could create a hollow, carve into the trunk, create some deadwood character like that. So yes, you could certainly do deadwood with it.
I don't know about anyone else, but they're just making quick work of this. You guys have to slow down. We have some time.
I do have to say that this isn't just something that we went out and pulled off of the bench. This has been hanging out with me for several months, and although I did not make branch decisions, I was constantly removing old needles, dead needles, and looking at the structure. You know, it's nice to be able to sit down and look at a tree for a while before you dive right into it. So oftentimes we rush into it and make decisions, but it's given me the opportunity to kind of learn the tree a little bit. Again, this I think Eric used the term bulge on his tree, so I'm going to use the same thing. A while ago, that would have kept me from going after material like this. But as I start to look at some of the old pines and some of the magazines and online, I see, you know, this happens, whether it's damage in nature or self-inflicted by the grower. This area here will need to be dealt with, and I think what we need to start to do, probably not today, but down the road, we're going to start to kind of kill some of this area and see if we can't reduce some of that wood or expose a little bit of some shari. So pretty interesting. The other thing too is that it has pretty nice roots. I don't see a lot of issues as I kind of excavated down in there. You know, we don't have there are no crossing roots on the surface. So the position of this tree is more than likely going to change, as many of our trees do on our benches over time. The front may change a little bit, the angle may change a little bit. So keeping that in mind, try to think with the end in mind, hard to do. We're going to leave some choices. All right. So lots of growth. Not really sure about these two lower branches, but we can always remove those later. If we decide to change the angle and to start reducing the root ball this year, these may be in a perfect location. And if they're not, we can always take them off. So these are going to come down. I'm going to slam those guys down a little bit, spread them out, get some light in there, and do the same thing with the top of the tree and start to space it out so we can get some interior sunlight. I mean, the budding inside of the top of this tree is, I think I'm going to bid on this tree today.
Are you allowed to bid on it?
Lynetta said that we
But
can.
he's not logged in.
We can.
How's he gonna bid?
We're going to share.
Oh, that's right.
We're going to share.
No, that's not true.
Lynetta said we can share.
I'm logged in, so.
Oh, Lynetta's logged in. All right. So it's pretty exciting.
One of the neat things about these three demos, and it's characteristic of what tree people do, is the whole issue of aftercare and doing what you need to do to keep the tree alive. I mean, it's one thing to get excited about a demo tree. It's it's another to take it home and know what to do to keep it healthy. And so pay particular attention to what each of the three artists are suggesting regarding what you do when you get it home. Jason, by the way, is one of only a handful of people in Southwest Florida who really have specialized in Japanese black pines and how to get them to grow in a healthy and vigorous manner here in the southern part of the state. This is a lot different than having the same tree in Mississippi. And if you have any questions, want to do lessons, those sorts of things with someone who's really up to speed with black pines in South Florida, you should check out Jason. Okay, Eric.
Yeah, before I make some more cuts with the saw, I'll point out some stuff. If you come around to the front here, Lindsay, that's kind of the front line of the tree where I'm looking at. So I've tipped the tree a little bit to get a little more movement. And what I'm looking at doing is following the line of the tree from the base coming up, coming around this curve and into an apex up here. So that gives me another direction change. So I'm going to come up that way, curve over, curve back, come up into an apex. So what I'm looking at cutting off still is eliminating this upper portion of the tree here where it has a thick area of reverse taper to gain better taper coming into this line. Also, this heavy limb here is going to get taken off, this big chunk. I've already kind of nibbled down with the knob cutter this scar where the last piece I took off was. That ideally will be smoothed out with a carving tool to get the last little bumps out of the way. But when I get these off, I'll nibble them down as well. So I'm kind of looking at the line like that. Now, as we said, branches, you know, do we keep, if our front's over in here, do we keep a thick lower branch like this? It kind of is coming from the back of the tree. Also, it feels pretty low to start and then have my next branch be up here. So I'm looking for more of a design that's actually going to start the branching up a little higher. So this is actually going to become my first branch right here. So trunk comes up, branch starts high. We'll have this. We've got a couple more to work with, and the tree is going to be about this size in here. So these two are coming off next. And as I said, this feels like it's more coming off the back to be used in the design with this front being over here. So that's, you know, would not be used in the finished result of this tree. So I'm going to get these lower branches. Also, this branch obviously coming right towards us isn't a real good one. There's a couple branches like this that feel like they're on the inside of a curve. So we'll eliminate some of those as well. And we do have a nice thick branch with some descent to it to start building our first pad off of. And once I get some wire on and get it started, I'll kind of throw a sketch up there of what I envision the finished product to look like as well as far as canopy size. But that's where I'm at, and I'll get some more limbs cut off.
Mike's all quiet.
Yeah, Mike, you are uncharacteristically quiet. Tell us a little bit about what you've been working on.
So I'm just trying to wire through the juniper currently. When I wire junipers, it's a little different than when I wire tropicals. Unless the juniper has a lot of movement, like this one's fairly straight, fairly formal, my branching should also be fairly formal, even if it's descending. So you see, I'm not putting in a lot of undulation into the tree. I'm just kind of bringing things down, maybe slight waviness to them, but not nearly as much as we're kind of used to seeing on tropicals. The other thing I'm trying to do when I first start to position juniper branches is start the descent as close to the trunk as possible. So I'm usually, like this branch, you can see is descending steeply from the point where it emerges from the primary branch. So I really want to get...
Let me just, sorry.
That's okay.
Real quick. One more time, Jeff. Got it?
Same.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Hold on.
I don't want to get your finger there. It's just flour. It's okay. Sorry, Mike.
That's okay.
Happens all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I'm doing junipers, one of the things that I try to do is descend steeply from the base of the trunk or the base of the primary branch, and then slowly start to fan it out. Now, something I've gotten into the habit of doing in recent years with junipers is I don't wire them all the way to the tip. A lot of these I'll wire just before it turns into that green tuft. And what I try to do is finish my wire on an upswing. And so I get one more kind of length to where I can position that tip any direction I want. So see this, I stopped way back here, but with that one tip, I can position that whole end of that branch quite dramatically. So I've gotten into the habit of not wiring all the way out onto these guys, leaving the greenish growth left alone, unless I'm doing fine wiring with very, very fine copper wire. So I doubt we'll have time to get into fine wiring today. So we're mostly just trying to do structural wiring. And then the aftercare for this guy, I like to tell people about the physiology of junipers because I think that helps a lot with aftercare. And when you think of how junipers grow and where they don't grow typically in rainforests. You don't see them in areas typically of high rainfall, maybe some exceptions, but most of the junipers we think about, especially the traditional ones that we're using for bonsai, grow in arid environments. So areas where they're not getting a ton of rainfall. And so you have to ask yourself, how is that tree getting moisture? You know, if it's not raining for months and months on end, how does that tree get moisture? The answer, which will help us horticulturally, is that the foliage acts as a net. So the way it's designed is almost like a condensation net. The scale-like foliage gathers moisture in the morning, condensation, soaks it into the foliage, and that's enough to get the tree through the day. So one of the ways that people really mess up with junipers is once they thin them out, they keep them way, way, way too wet. So we're also going into shorter growth growing season. So we're going to get less light during the day. The tree will also be slowing down, so it'll be using less water. So realistically, to recover this tree, I'd probably be focusing most of my attention on watering the foliage and just letting a little bit on the most days just fall into the pot. And maybe every week or so, give it a full watering. But recovering junipers after working on them is probably the #1 reason for losing them. So what I'm trying to accomplish is, again, just bringing down our pads, building structure that we'll be able to build off of here. And the physiology, noticing on trees where the foliage starts on them. So if you think of a big pine tree that we look at out in Florida, you don't see foliage starting at the base of the branch near the trunk. You don't even see it on the secondary branches or even the tertiary branches. The foliage ends up on the very fine twigs and everything else is just structure. So we're building out structure to be able to build our foliage pads at a later date. So that's why I'm not too concerned if this area is a little sparse. As long as I have good bifurcation and good branch division close to the trunk, I'm okay to thin it out towards the tips and start to prepare it for pads. Okay.
So you guys almost done?
Almost.
I'll be done in a couple minutes here. Just gotta throw some wire on.
I actually had this pre-wired at home and everything.
Should I like take a break? Slow down?
Well, what are you doing? Is that clip and grow over there?
Hey. You know, take off what you need.
Eric, we have a question from one of the members, which is basically has had a Caliandra that just never flowers. Is there potentially a mistake of trimming off the ends of the branches, cutting the blossoms off before they open? Have you had any circumstances where they just don't bloom?
Well, depending on the variety, some are better bloomers than others. Also, some will bloom in regards to moisture. For instance, if you're keeping the tree too wet, that could be impeding blooming. Also, the fertilizer schedule that you're using. And of course, as you mentioned, Mike, cutting off the blooms, because a lot of the varieties that are typically seen are blooming on the tips. So like if you see here, the flowers are all out at the ends. So that could be part of the problem. Some of the varieties like the Schultzii, and that's one of the reasons I like them, is they bloom more interior. So they're not just blooming on the tips. So that's one that even if you're pruning heavily, you're still going to get the flowers. So I would say chances are it's the root of it's probably more in moisture or fertilization or even exposure. Does it have a lot of sun where you've got it? Because that's essential, of course, too. A lot of sun, and assess, is the tree root bound? Is it draining good for you? And is your fertilization on point? You could always supplement with a higher middle number fertilizer, something like for inducing blooms, to try and see if that helps too.
Great. I think we've made some progress on his pine in terms of wiring. Beginning to get a feel for what it might look like.
Yeah, wire everything, or you have to cut it off. That's how I was taught. So
That's the wire.
that's it. Whether it's a Nia with 1,000 branches or a pine with 2, wire everything.
You remember, did he used to do that thing with you, Jason, where he'd tell you by the time I come around, he could give you till he made 1 lap? He'd be like, you gotta wire everything by the time I get back.
Yeah. At first, I was so slow that he had me take the tree home with me because that's how long it would take me to wire. But no, I think that's just probably you. I think that he did that too.
Yeah, Mike needed a lot of help early on.
Yeah, Mike.
Definitely, it was slow. Yeah.
He was still doing a lot of fishing and stuff back then, you know, like lots of donuts and, you know.
One of the first adventures we had was to Mary Village. Do you remember that?
I do. I tell that story to my student to this very day, how Eric inhaled the entire guava pastry, and it was 1,000,000 degrees, but he ate it and took it like a champ anyway, but it like burned him like all the way down. Remember that? And he was driving. I was scared. I've never seen anybody eat a sandwich in like 1 bite. Right? You know? It's because you're too busy. You got to get everything done. Yeah, there's no time to eat. No, you can't waste time eating. We need to go dig telephone pole size visitas and, you know.
Eric, you're using your knob cutter to make these sorts of
Correct. And typically I'd use a tool, a little mini angle grinder, to then come in and smooth those out a little bit more, which just due to being inside here and, you know, the constraints, that won't be done today. However, I'll put some of the top gin cut paste on those when I'm done. And then at a later date, that can be smoothed out, because as I said, these are real slow to roll over. So it's not like we're going to lose anything if that waits a month or 2 to be smoothed and contoured more.
Okay.
But yeah, I just use the knob cutter to kind of get it down so that the profile I wanted is there. And now I'm getting some wire on what we're going to keep. And then we'll talk a little bit more as I position them.
Still just wiring away, just slowly making it through the tree, trying to get everything down. So this is probably the more boring of the things we have to do. Now, once we do have our pad structure set, I would not be in a rush to repot this tree. So the theory with junipers or with conifers in general is that the tree has to be very, very strong to repot it. And so if we're styling it, chances are more often than not, we're styling in the fall and it will be too weak to repot in the winter. Now, there are exceptions, you know, if you're working with a tree that's already in a bonsai pot, that you're styling maybe for the third time, and you know it's very, very vigorous. Also, maybe you're not doing a full repot. There's a lot of different ways and variables that will change that theory, but for the most part, you would style it and then wait to see how the tree recovers. If it's absolutely growing gangbusters and it's got shoots like this on it again, then you're probably safe to do a 50% bare root. Other than that, you wait a year or maybe 2 years. There's no timeline to juniper health. Those people who collect Yamadori and like really collect really high-end trees, they'll recover trees for years on end to ensure that they don't lose the tree once they start working on it. So don't be in a rush to do everything at one time.
What do you mean by repotting half, Mike? Repot half top to bottom, or you're repotting half front to back?
Well,
What does that look like? What does that mean?
well, I think Jason and I were just talking about this and the semantics of whether it matters if you pot a quart like a half laterally or a half horizontally. And honestly, I don't think it really matters. It just changes the way you're going to water. I'd probably prefer to do half here and leave a little organic towards the top. But Eric likes, or Jason likes to do it like a sundial, you know, like half here, half there.
Yeah.
Or heavy one side, light.
I guess I'm just not in a huge rush to really repot. You know, it's really like this I wouldn't be in a huge rush. If it's healthy and it's growing and it's kicking butt, then you know, I would leave it, right? Learn how to water. Because once you start getting in there and getting after those roots, you really set the tree back, and you really have to be careful with a pine. Unfortunately, I made my mistakes with pricey trees, but you know, you have to learn a little bit. You gotta understand all of the energies and the needles here. So that's why I'm going to have, it'll be a little bit out of shape, a little bit unsightly. There'll be a lot of growth at the ends, but we want to keep that energy flowing through the entire branch. So eventually we can cut back closer to the trunk. So what did you say, Mike?
No, Eric said that. Is it okay if it's unsightly?
No, I said he stated his tree was going to be
Well,
unsightly. He's already setting himself up there.
Yeah.
Setting the bar low so that he comes out looking good, right?
Correct. I mean, you didn't have to call me out, you know?
Well, technically, Eric called me.
That's, yeah.
I got a backup teach, man, every time.
Mike, you need me to help you do some wiring now that I'm done?
I'm almost done too. We can all three go over there.
It's also really, really prickly.
I can.
You want to help?
No, I'm all right. Are you already done? What about that low branch? What's going on with that?
That's easy. You just cut that off, right? So I've got all the wire on there, and I'm going to start positioning these guys. I've defoliated the tree, obviously, as you see. It is getting a little late for tropicals to do that, but this is fully rooted in. It's a real healthy tree, so as long as you watch the watering, the first week to 2 weeks, it should push out new growth real quick. So I'm not too concerned about defoliating it now. However, I definitely would not repot it this late in the season. So it's going to get the styling today. I would let it leaf out, fill in, and carry through. The proper time to repot this species would be good middle of summer. So like May, June, July, that's a good window of time. At which time, being a tropical, if you did repot this, you would also want to defoliate it to balance the stress that you're doing with the roots at the same time. You know, that could be done at that point, recover it in the shade, keep it shaded till it leafs out, fills in again. But today we're just going to handle the styling aspect here. I've also kind of cheated a bit up here just so I have a little extra length on a couple of these upper branches. I went ahead and wired the flower spike. So that's going to actually extend my branch a little bit. So I have a little bit more visually to represent where we're going. Flower is going to eventually fall off. So like, for instance, this branch ends here. Also, this branch ends here. But that's just giving me a little extra visually so that whoever wins this can kind of see where we're going in terms of design. So I'm going to start bending these, get them into shape, and then we'll talk a little more.
Lindsay, we had a question from Phil, and it's with respect to both the pines and the junipers, which was, his point was he was surprised we were working on pines and junipers in October and not deeper into the winter months. And I think the answer, and you can confirm it or not, is we're really not doing any work on the roots. There's no repotting, no reduction of roots. And as long as we're doing that with both junipers and pines, we're okay doing exactly what you're seeing now.
Is that Phil Creek?
Phil Creek.
Phil Creek doesn't have too good a luck with junipers and pines, I don't think.
Or pines.
Does he?
Oh, right.
The Turner Valley Fair Play.
So there you go, Phil.
I'm gonna take a break since you.
Are you allowed? Are you allowed?
I'll be back in like 20 minutes. Give you a chance.
Is
to
that
catch up.
allowed?
Let's answer Phil's question because it's a good question.
It is a good question.
And, you know, the vigor of the tree is what's setting us up. So Phil, I'm about 3 weeks away from when I'm going to start going through and choosing buds post decandling of my more refined pine trees. I'm also entering that time of year, which is usually right around the 1st to middle of November, that I'm going to go ahead and remove old needles on pines that I have not decandled. This is all setting me up for the end of January through February to do root work if I need to. All right. So what I've learned with the pines is if they're healthy, you can do a lot more with them. As Mike was saying, and as Mike Knowlton was saying, we're not going to start digging into the roots. And the rule that I've always followed is if I make large cuts, too many large cuts, I'm not going to repot the tree this year. So I'm not going to be removing large branches, creating large scars, and go through and do major root work on this tree. It's kind of a dumb pot, but it's a deep pot. And the tree uses so much water in the growing season. The whole myth for me, that in my mind, was that pines don't like water. Well, these things drink like a tropical tree, in my opinion. Some of my pines I water twice a day. This time of year, I'm watering, 9 or 10 times a week, some of my pine trees. So, control the bugs, control the needle cast, and feed your trees. Let them push, let them be healthy, and I think we can do more work than we think we can on some of these guys. Like I said, the next 6 to 8 weeks on this tree are going to be spent making sure that it doesn't get overwatered. If we go into winter and we have a rainy week, I'll pull the tree underneath of the clear plastic shade or the clear plastic shade house that I have, so that it will still get sun, but it's not going to receive the rain that I cannot control. So,
And I'd like to touch on that too, is there's a lot of different states that trees go through, conifers, tropicals, everything. And putting hard rules, like saying, oh, you can only work on this tree at this time of year, isn't true for all stages of all junipers. So like I was saying before, if you look at some of the guys who are training in Japan, they'll work on junipers in the middle of summer. They'll do some repotting then. They'll do it in the fall. They'll do it in the winter. But it's not all the same type of tree. Okay, so it's not doing a bare root or transfer from organic soil and a full styling and all that at one time. Usually if they're repotting out of season, you'll see that the tree is well established already. It's been repotted once or twice before, so they're doing maintenance repots. And so there's a lot of little variables that play into it. Now, when we're teaching, and this goes for everybody who teaches, is what we try to do is give the broadest rules possible that will help the most people with success. So if we try and we just go out and we say, hey, you can repot whenever you want, a lot of people are going to fail at that. Whereas if we try to tell them to repot most of their junipers in the wintertime or in the beginning of spring, more people are going to have success. So there are no blanket statements, you know, in the reality of bonsai. There's just variables.
Okay, artists, I'm just giving you a clock warning. It's about 11. We've got about 30 minutes left.
Wow, Mike, you better hurry.
Hey, I'm right on time.
You better hurry, buddy.
Don't you have to repot yours, or what are you doing?
I'm almost done. I just gotta.
What about that big knob at the top? What about? I thought you said you were going to angle grind that.
No, that's whoever wins that. This is going to.
What if they can't angle grind? What if they don't have an angle grinder? I don't have an angle grinder. I sold it. I'll use hammer and chisel, which you made fun of.
Mike's only hammer and chisel.
Yeah, I'm all hammer and
Hey, can
chisel.
we talk about your hammer and chisel?
Yeah, I'll talk about it. Yeah, so let's talk about hammer and chisel. So one of the reasons I've gotten away from rotary tools, such as the Samurai and the other power tools, is more often than not, rotary tools tend to make unnatural looking deadwood. So unless you're 100% sure that you're not going to cross the grain this way, if you cross the grain, anybody who has an eye will see it, and it'll prove that it's artificial. So I like to peel fibers. I like to expose internal grain, and I go with whatever the tree already has within the wood. I don't try and take a straight piece of wood and carve it into a loop or anything that's going to be unnatural to the grain of the wood. So that's why I've gotten away from using power tools a lot, is mostly just for the grain.
And also, you tend to like cut off your branches when you're using them sometimes.
Sometimes, or I get the wire rolled up in it.
Yeah, and make like a weed whacker effect. Do that.
Yeah.
So we have a question regarding both the juniper and black pine as to whether they're in organic or bonsai soil. And the question heard that maybe Jason was having to water more often because it was in bonsai soil. And the answer to the question is both the juniper and the pine are in organic soil. Yes. Jason's point is black pines during the growing season in intense sun will require a lot of water. The more needles, the more water. And that's, I think, one of the things that he's learned is he's gotten to more familiarity with growing pines in South Florida is you have to be really focused on watering heavily during the hot weather season and backing off during the dormant season. If you don't water too much in the dormant season, your roots will rot. If you don't water enough during the hot weather season, you're going to have loss of vigor and the tree will be suffering. So with Japanese black pines, it's a little bit more sensitive to being real careful with when to water more and when to water less. Same thing with junipers. I think the reason we often kill our junipers is we just water once a day, or even when we might better water once every 3 days. And so you have to really be careful about over and under watering with evergreens.
Really, the main thing there too, I agree with that. Water when the tree's dry. When the tree's dry, that's when you water. This particular tree, when it was raining about a month ago, every day it was raining buckets. I didn't water. This tree went probably 2 weeks without being watered. And then there's a patch coming out of April, May, going into June, where it's not really raining very much, and it's really wind, the humidity's down a little bit, the tree's waking up, it's using a lot of water. So that's a time where even this tree in May, before it started to rain, was getting a little bit of extra water at the end of the day as well. So
this is a weird time to water in October because some days you'll need to water more and some days you'll need to water less. So Yeah, this can be tricky. I've had a lot of issues watering in the fall, probably more than any other time, because there will be windy days, but the days also shorter. There will be hot days, but there will also be cooler nights. And so this can be pretty tricky. There could be days where you're watering twice a day, and there's days where you're not watering at all. So always pay attention to the tree, like Jason's saying, and learn your trees from, look at the signs. The tree will usually give you a few warnings before it is dead. So usually it'll tell you, hey, I need more water, or hey, I need less water. So if we listen to the signs, that's kind of how, people who work at a high level, or me, Eric, Jason, anybody who's doing this professionally, you really have to pay attention to your trees and listen to what they're trying to tell you before it hits that point where you can't turn it around. Are you done already?
Yeah.
You're not going to wire that lower branch.
I spent, I was on this tree for about 4 hours last night, thinning. So yes, this looks like a lot, but you should see the pile that hit the ground. That's how full this tree was. You could not see any of this tree. That's how many needles were on the tree.
All right, so Lindsay, that's the front. If you line up with that, the little T there represents the upside down T represents the angle that you're going to tip it at. So whoever takes this home sees that red line angles. However, that's with an expo marker, so it's going to probably wash off pretty soon. So remember where you're going to go. But my tree that I'm designing is going to be, as I said, start with this is the first branch. So we are going for a wider crown, fuller crown to promote a lot of flowers. Tree comes up into an apex here. We've got our first branch, good back branch here, some branches to the side. This branch is in a bad location. I'm using that today mainly to represent the fact that we need a branch over here. Likely what's going to happen is you're going to get that branch either from this bud here that wires down, or maybe there's a bud in here that could fill that, or you might get one off this point of the trunk. It should back bud all over at this point, but this branch would come off later. That's just on to represent, because if I take that off today, you've got probably a pretty big void there. Also, this branch is pretty thick. I'd rather it be made up from this bud or this bud, eliminate this end, because we want taper in our limbs also. Much like if you kind of come around and film from above this spot, you can see there's a thick branch that comes out. We can't get a lot of movement here. However, we've got these two small ones. Typically, if I was styling this here at the nursery, I'd just cut this off and just build with this. But stepwise, so you have more branches for a healthy tree, first step would be to cut this off at home, work with the branching that develops off these. Then later you might go back to just this one, because we want the best taper and movement in our branches as well as our tree. So Mike keeps pointing out that I left this on down here. What am I doing with that? Because I knew I was going to finish so quick and these guys need some extra time.
So you bought like a 1/3 of a tree. Because,
they're not quite comfortable with wiring and speed wiring. So they need a little more time, which is okay. So as I mentioned earlier on, you could do a tree that was a semi-cascade that could be pretty interesting here. So I'm going to go ahead and wire that tree out. Okay, we're not going to cut this off here. However, if someone wins this and they like the idea of a small semi-cascade or that design better, you could put an air layer on this. You could air layer this off, still make a second tree that would have some interest, and you'd have roots right here, and you could make a small upright tree and have the semi-cascade. Now, if you get the tree and you win it and you're like, I don't want a semi-cascade, just pull out your saw when you get it home, cut that off, put some wound sealer on it, and you're good to go. But that gives me something to do while I wait on these guys to catch up. So I'll go ahead and work on that at this point while they're coming along.
Hey, Mike, if you need me to come, I can come help you. Listen, this is why I asked Lynetta if this was a race, and
gotta like, use all the time available.
Yeah, don't want to finish.
You don't want to finish too early. So you guys can see I'm slowly just framing out some branches. I do have more slowly. I do have probably 4 or 5 times the branches that Eric has, but
Does demos a lot of time.
well, I like to sit. It's
I gave
comfy
him a
for me.
chair, so he hasn't used it.
I've got a very large tree. Some would say this is a grown man's tree.
Well, okay.
I told Jason, what did you say when I said Eric would give you a It's Eric's traditional. That's your trademark laugh. When we do something that you really think is fun. So yes, slowly working out on the juniper. So with juniper theory too, one thing I didn't talk about is the foliage scale versus juvenile foliage. Most schools have thought, unless you're dealing with tosho or needle juniper, is that we want scale foliage. We want this mature foliage, and not the young spiny foliage. Normally, I don't really care. I will work gladly with procumbens, juvenile foliage, but this is actually really spiny. I definitely wouldn't mind getting it converted over to the mature foliage. So I did spend a lot of time carving this before with the hand tools, trying to add interest to this piece of deadwood. I do have a before pic that I'm going to upload for the Shoku Club, so you guys can take a look at that. But I knew that, especially since Eric's already busting my chops about wiring slow, I knew I wouldn't have enough time to do all that. I should have picked a Caliandra with 3 branches. Are you done too, Jason?
I am not.
What are you doing?
Mike said we were going too fast, so I slowed down. Now I'm getting yelled at. So
I know, I don't get it.
Consider the source.
There's no pleasing him.
So I have a question for Eric. You had mentioned earlier at the start of the demo that you might consider removing either or both of these because they were too heavy. Have you changed your mind or not?
Were you not following along, Mike? Where have you been, Mike? This is I know.
Eric, it's been a rough night.
This is the second tree option. So I'm building an option. This is the semi-cascade.
Oh,
gotta have options.
So upper tree without this, the winter cuts this off. Second tree option is air layer this at home, make a semi-cascade and build that tree.
you weren't entirely clear.
Oh, okay.
I'm
He
sorry.
wasn't planning on the lower part.
Yeah, he sort of reinvented history, like.
But yes, for the upper tree, this is too thick. So this would come off.
Okay.
And it's also a little low where it originates from, so.
We're gonna move over here to Jason and see, as he's almost done with the wiring.
Yes, as we tend to start to come to the end of our time allotment, with tropicals, we just start cutting branches off if we don't have time to wire them. But I'm going to spend a little extra time today, even if I go late.
Does that mean Mike's should do the same thing also?
Well, I just, I'd rather the viewers out there who are home having coffee and eating
Yeah.
crow nuts and stuff, to, you know, give what they paid for. So a
Yeah.
little extra time,
Hey, Mike, you can hang around too, right?
you know. It's like all my classes here, we sell them from 9 to 12, but it's really like 9 to 4,
9 to 3:30.
9 to 2:30.
You do get your money's worth with the class budget.
That's true. It's true. This is an exciting tree. I think, glad you stopped at Mississippi and brought this back. Boss.
Yeah. Okay, I'm done wiring my second tree. How are you guys doing? Well, you guys good?
It's all about finding our rate.
Okay.
Technically, if you're finishing too fast, that's that.
Andre, can you get me, well, we got that white towel. Am I able to use that little white towel? Sure. That's why we got it.
You want the black board too, the black,
Not, well, not for now. I mean, you might want to when you get some
Maybe.
after pictures, but for right now, just a rough, if I could use the towel here.
Probably. A little bit too.
Is this the way you want it? Yeah, that works.
Perfect.
Covering up your tree.
Well, I'm gonna want to, yes.
it was reminded that you said you would draw a picture of the finished tree.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
In pastels, you send it with the oil. Like oil, it's a oil. So what, Eric, what do you do with the roots that are gonna come up on the other side?
Well, you see, Mike, they really aren't, because if you look, they're up on this side. This side, they're deep, so. it
What would
matches
you
up
do if you
perfect.
did have some roots there?
I probably wouldn't do this design. But as you can see, the trunk is suited towards that. Okay.
oh boy.
Okay, I'll come around, I'll position this, and then I'll sketch out on the board.
It was noted that you said you would move smiles on it.
Okay, sure. I can do that. I got plenty of time. They're gonna be a while. So I can draw their trees for them too.
Yeah.
Okay. So this tree. Okay, semi-cascade is, you can see that okay? Well, that kind of shades it out, doesn't it, with the light? Does it show up for you, Lindsay?
Yeah,
Or it might work better with the board. I can just hold the board in front of it.
yeah.
Towel kind of shades out everything. Maybe
I am
that-
gonna like, I want to defend myself. I did hold his tree 2 times. So
How
he
about
could
that?
sawzall it.
Okay,
So
that's-
it
I
put
did
me
too, I
behind.
held it one time too.
Is it all
It put me behind.
Sawzall. Yeah.
That's true.
You got that.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's your semi-cascade. I might tip it a little bit more to the right. It's just, if I tip it any further right now, it tends to want to fall over the top. Mike, you can maybe tip it with your hand there a little bit, just to show just the hair more towards me. Yeah, something like that, maybe. And then, as I said, you could air layer the top off and build a cascade design that could come out, say, somewhere into here. Get a little more length on it, which would be nice for this species as well, because you'd have a nice canopy for the flowers. So roots here would be under the soil. You'd eliminate that upper portion, obviously. So that could be an interesting tree as well. So we've got the 2 options, the semi-cascade and the upright tree. And as I said, if you get this and you want the upright, you just zip that off with a saw at home. You could even play around if you wanted to try and layer a piece of that and just for material to grow, but I would just cut that off if I was going with the upright design and build your tree up there. So in either case, I think you got a couple of good options to work with. I'll draw out kind of what I'm envisioning with that. And certainly any questions on either design or the species, I'm happy to answer. For them to pad, you said? Oh, to bud. They should bud pretty quick and start filling in. And the key for me for developing the ramification at this point is when these leaf out and start filling in, don't let them run past your profile. So as the growth extends and grows out here, tip it back. Keep it to this profile because that'll force the interior buds to lengthen and develop so that next summer you can defoliate the tree, come in and look for some areas to remove and eliminate some of these thicker branches and rewire and develop your design. So keep it to that profile. You don't really need to run any sacrificial limbs. The first branch is already pretty thick. The apex already has some good thickness. So I would just work on developing refinement and ramification inside to work with. Now, if you did go with the smaller tree and you took this off, because there's not as much growth down here, what I would do in that situation, you've got a couple things to think about. Say we just made the decision to cut this off today. We're not going to air layer it. Let's just go that route, okay? You want to ensure that the trunk doesn't die back on this side because most of what's feeding this is going to be coming up this side of the tree in a straight line. So one thing that you're going to want to do when you make that cut and you get a bunch of buds here, you're going to want something on this side to grow and develop. And you're going to let that run. In a couple months, you'll cut it back to maybe 1 inch long, let it run again, cut it back. Do that repeatedly over the course of the next year, year and a half, so that the tree sees that most of the nutrition needs to go over here. This is the branches that's calling the most from the roots, and these roots should start feeding that area of the tree as well. It should switch over. If you just cut that and keep everything cleaned off here, chances are this side of the trunk's going to die down to the soil, and you're going to have a lot of deadwood to deal with. I don't really see this, and I'll show you on the picture, as being a semi-cascade that has a apex. However, you could, if you're tipping it, maybe use something in this area to kind of build a little top on. But we do have kind of a thick knot here. So if you pull from this and you try and grow a little apex, it's going to get a little congested and it's going to tend to swell more. So my apex is actually going to probably pull from somewhere in here and come up and be a little top that fills in with that semi-cascade. But it is important to let something run or a couple things and repeatedly cut them off for the next year to 2 years before you finally eliminate all the growth on that side. And I also might let something run for vigor here just to get a little more energy on the bottom if I was cutting this off, just so you have plenty of growth going through winter. So if you did take that, don't necessarily cut this back, let this run for a while, get some growth to work with, then maybe rewire it in spring. I'm doing good, Mike. How are you?
You almost done?
Yeah, I'm just drawing pictures here while I wait on you guys. Yeah, it's got green powder puffs. I don't have a red marker, so.
Do you sell the green powder puff one?
I don't.
Yeah.
So upright tree, trunk's not exactly matching, but you've got the movement. First branch here dropping lower, filling out, and then kind of a broad canopy, a broad tropical canopy. It's not, you know, necessarily a pointy triangle top here. The idea is to go for this large rounded shape, so you have a lot of area for the sun to hit and you get a lot of blooms on top. This branch pokes out a little further, so you get some blooms down there, and it kind of leads the eye over the negative space of your pot. I would probably go with an oval pot. Could also go with a round pot too, but I think with where I would go with getting the width on it, it would match up better with an oval glazed pot. With the color blooms, might look good in a nice white pot if you can get that. Would really make the red pop. So that would be option one. Be represented by there. The other option, you just get my bearings. He cuts to the right. I got it, Mike. Oh, well, you can swing around for them, I guess. Start a little further over here. So the other option, we have this really abrupt descent, you know, when it curves down, made by this branch that kind of comes down this way. And, you know, at this transition where right now we've got the trunk coming up, that's going to need to be handled by cutting that off. And what you're going to either do, you could try to come down low here and try to come through with a carving tool and establish taper. So you kind of round it out like that. So visually you've got taper and a direction change. Or as someone asked earlier on about carving, in deadwood, you could come in as another option and probably do something where you kept some of this top here to kind of represent, you know, something that happened in nature that caused it to cascade. And maybe still to create taper, you're going to remove a piece of trunk like that, but then try to maybe pull down some of that deadwood into the front of the design here. Allow, as I said, a sacrifice to come here so you don't kill it all the way. Let that grow, cut it back, let it grow, cut it back. But create some deadwood on the design there, and then let this kind of drop down like such. Develop your pads as you come down. Are you repotting over there, Chuck? What are you doing?
He didn't tell you that was part of
Are
it.
you repotting? You put in one of those nice terracotta grow
I
pots. Huh?
decided I would go ahead.
That's good. So this would go in a deeper semi-cascade type pot. You'd be looking to maybe pull an apex off of here, pull it back, kind of squiggle it around so that you get some foliage in this area as a crown. Pad out some pads here going down. And end up with something like that as a semi-cascade. Good.
So Eric, I have some thoughts which were raised also by a member who said, you know, looking at the tree, it appears, at least at this point, there's at least the beginning of a reverse taper. And you can see it on both sides, that there's a point in here which is somewhat reversed.
Correct.
Which, if it were my tree and I were pursuing it, I would do exactly what Eric suggested in terms of doing the cascade, but not until I air layered this.
Yeah.
And I'd come up right here where the taper was somewhat reversed and do the air layer up in here. And you've got two beautiful trees.
Yeah, that would be where you'd want the roots to emerge. It's important to keep that in mind when you throw the air layer, because you don't want your roots down here.
Correct.
Showing that reverse taper. You'd
Correct.
want the roots to emerge at that widest point.
Correct.
So that's certainly a viable option. The question would be, you know, is it a little late to air layer now? Would you air layer with the root quicker in spring? As warm as we are here now, I think you could still put the air layer on, but it would need to be on obviously through winter and into spring. If you waited, just kept this prune, developed that. If you put the air layer on in spring, you might have better success with getting more radial roots and a quicker removal of it than if you try the air layer now. Just because if in the next 3 weeks we get some cold fronts, that's going to really slow down this tree's ability to want to make roots. Now, if you like the taller tree, you know, no tree is perfect. I've seen lots of finished trees, you know, that I see in magazines and at exhibitions when I've traveled around the country and gone to Japan. You see lots of trees that have taper issues, you know, that are styled out and beautiful, phenomenal trees. So if you wanted a taller tree, this wouldn't really slow me down. Is it always going to be a little thicker than the part below it? Potentially. But because you aren't going to be growing branches in this area, it shouldn't get any worse than it is today. So if you think about this tree and you think that, okay, maybe in say 15 years, you're developing this tree and the size caliper that it's going to probably be half again as thick as it is now. And at that point, it may not be a visual issue. The other thing would be if it did bother you and you wanted the taller tree, depending on how you handle this and removal of this, you may be able to do a little bit of reduction if you carry your deadwood and kind of hollow out and carve something that might help eliminate a little bit of that taper. You'd have to play around with it. I wouldn't naturally, or I wouldn't normally create deadwood on the back of the design, but if pulling that scar up higher was able to eliminate some of the bulge, that could be an option. But I think if it were me for a long-term tree here at my nursery, if I was going to work this for my collection, I think I'd go with the Cascade also. But there's a lot of people that want an upright full tree with flowers, and a Cascade is a little more maintenance than an upright tree. It's a little easier if you're not that interested in doing a lot of wiring. It's a little bit easier to develop the upright tree than it's going to be to carry this out. So in any case, you've got two options. Whoever gets this, am I square there for the front? Okay. So how much time do they have? How are we doing?
We're running out of time, but
Overtime.
I think I'm
1 minute.
1 minute. Yeah. Did I finish right on time?
You did.
See, when you've been doing this a while, you'll get to know the time in your clock. You'll finish right on time.
I'm on time. Your clock's a little fast.
Okay.
I'm right on time. And you were blabbing, and I had the sawzall for you. You didn't sawzall me. You didn't sawzall Jason.
Do you want me to help you cut this deadwood out? I can help you with the saw. No.
Oh, by the way, David Ebinger, thanks the videographer very much for a great job.
Very good, thank you.
Mike, I left you some space up there to sketch your tree. Okay, right next to mine. And Jason, you got a little spot right here. Okay.
Perfect.
This bottom corner.
hey, Jason, are you about done?
I am, yes.
All right, let's bring it over here. You want it inside or outside?
We're gonna go ahead and leave it outside of the pot. I need that terracotta pot that we were talking about earlier.
Are you gonna put it in that bad boy?
No,
What are you doing?
but I wanna just change the position because it's gonna grow back in this pot. But I wanna talk about a couple things with it here.
You're getting the terracotta pot.
I do. Just want to go ahead and put just a little bit of paste around. One of the things that I learned recently is that, you know, instead of making a complete flush cut on these pines, especially when there's a lot of growth around some of the larger branches that you removed, is you leave a little bit of a stub and you nibble away, and that tree, this tree, that stub, like here, will continue to pull sap. So it'll continue to pull that energy through that portion of the tree to feed other branches that are around it. Okay, so if you look here, this was a pretty good sized branch that was removed. So I scored it, peeled it, left a little bit of a stub, surrounded it with a little bit of paste, and that will continue to leach sap through the growing season. And same way here. This is going to get cleaned up a little bit more, but instead of making that completely flush, we cover the end of that a little bit with some paste, and it'll continue to draw sap. And I think that a position somewhere in here, this is one of the things that I don't really like about trying to style a pine for the first time, because it's not going to look very clean. But all of these needles that are long, all of the needles that are hanging are necessary to continue to draw energy to the branches that we need. So you have no choice. We don't want to come in here and scissor prune for the sake of a nice looking tree at the end of the demo. I'm more interested in making sure the tree stays alive. So I like this movement. This big nub in the back is going to be whittled down and kind of carved out a little bit over time. You have multiple choices. We can go here, apex, here, apex. We could pull something off of here, but remember, the apex is not necessarily one single branch, it's an area. It's the top third of the tree composed of many, many branches in some cases.
We could bring it back over here. We'll
Here? You want that in the plastic?
No, right there. Is this mine? Yeah, I got a beer for case.
Hey, right here,
All right, we're organizing ourselves, and it looks that way. So for everyone's information, the auction procedures, it's important to follow them. And we are going to use the chat option. And I will be the auctioneer. Participants who want to bid will use the chat option, as I mentioned, to enter your name, your club ID. If you're from Shofu, just put an S. If you're from Ikiban, put an I. If you're from Bonsai Society of Southwest Florida, put a B. $10 minimum increments. Payment procedures. If you win this bid, you are to communicate to Catherine, and we'll put the information on the chat. It's Catherine with an I, 2020@verizon.net. Catherine 2020@verizon.net. Need to work out the terms of payment with her by October 18th. With payment instructions, which she'll give you. Payment needs to be completed by the 24th. So the next question is, where would you pick this tree up? If you're from Shofu, as president of Shofu, I'll take the tree home, and you would check in with me to pick the tree up once Catherine is verified that you've made the payment. If you're from Ichiban, Kathy will have the tree. We will deliver it to her house this afternoon. You will make arrangements with Kathy to pick your tree up from her. If you're from Bonsai Society of Florida, you'll do the same thing except with Sam Waller. Sam is not here in the room today, but we'll make arrangements so that the tree, if it's awarded to someone from Southwest Florida, that he will arrange to pick it up within a day or two. No payments will be made to Wigert. This is all payments will be confirmed through Catherine Harris. That's Catherine with an I, 2020 at Verizon.net. So hopefully we are clear on the instructions, and we're going to open the bidding on the pine first, and then we'll do some close-ups of the other trees as we finish. And the bidding will open at $100. This, as a finished tree, is probably $800 to $1,000 tree in about 3 to 5 years. So understand these, all 3 trees are very, very special.
Are you gonna, Mike, closing comments? He has to do that one. He did. Got it.
I have 100.
Okay, we have 100 bid, opening bid. We have 100. We have 100. We have 200. Do we have 200? We have 150. $100 bid for a wonderful Japanese black pine.
Come on, Phil.
A base of the trunk, a base of the trunk of about
Catherine says 120. Catherine.
120. Okay, we have a bid for 120. This, the base of this trunk is about a 2.5 to 3 inch base. The pine, to grow that probably is 15 years in the ground. 120.
Got 150 here.
150, we have a bid for 150. 175, we have 175. We have a bid for 175, anyone? We have a bid for 150.
You're gonna get a steal, Chef.
150. I can't get the
We
number.
have a bid for 175. I know we need to take a little time to receive the bids, but we're all patient. We only have 3 trees. We have a bid on the table for 150. Anyone for 175? All right,
Don't you need a
150 going once,
Wow.
150 going twice, 150 going twice and a half. Sold. All right, sold for 150.
And we don't have to take it home.
Yeah.
Jason gets to take it home.
Oh, yes. All right, so we're going to shift over to Mike Lane. We're going to have him talk to us about his finished look, which is dramatic and different. Very, very nice, Mike.
Thank you.
Watch it.
Despite all of the.
Yeah, all the harassment.
I know, you know, after all that harassing, no, actually Eric did, again, step in as a great teacher and pointed out something that I had left at first because I thought taking it away would leave me with less branching on the left. But within 2 seconds, he's like, no, that it's not even coming off there. So he stepped in and offered another great eye. And so we took out this large stub that was here. It only had 2 branches that really didn't do too much to the design. And it clears up this angle, which is a lot better. So the stub that was here made an angle that is far different than the deadwood that we have here, the straighter deadwood. So whenever you're trying to do traditional Japanese bonsai, one of the things that they'll really hammer is consistency of design. So if this was straight, this angle over here, this trunk line coming this direction that's mirroring the movement of this deadwood is better than one that moves backwards and forms across like that. Even if the movement is a little dramatic, it's better to make a slanting tree coming off of the deadwood than it is to make an informal tree coming off the deadwood. So you guys can see too, I'll rotate so you can see. So this is one of the reasons why I'm big into breaking deadwood and pulling fibers, is without me having to have any kind of skill with a carving tool and carve channels into it, I basically just expose what's already hidden into the deadwood. So as soon as you break off that outer shell, you will start to see grain in the wood, which is what we want to see. So usually when I'm making the gin on the design, such as this, or even this guy to the back, you'll see that I break the face away so that the viewer gets to see into the grain. The other thing that I tried to do was make as compressed a triangle as I could. Ideally, in time, I'd like to lower the height, the apex of this tree underneath the deadwood spire. More often than not, when you do have a large deadwood spire, it'll behoove you to have the deadwood be taller than the apex of the tree. So you should see the apex usually under the deadwood. So I don't think that we would have had enough branches to form an apex if we had done that convincingly. And also, whenever we're working with junipers, we don't want to take more than, we want to leave at least 30% of the foliage on the tree to maintain health and vigor. The other thing that will happen more than likely, because we just worked this tree so hard, is that any of the mature foliage that we have gained, we're probably going to lose, and it's going to revert back to juvenile foliage. So it'll probably be that way for a couple of years. You'll be lucky, maybe a year, it'll start to revert back to mature. But anytime that you take off more than 30 to 50% of a juniper's foliage, depending on species, you'll usually be rewarded with a bunch of juvenile growth, which is what we don't want. So usually going forward, when we do maintenance work on this tree, we'll try to only do 30% at a time and not upset the tree anymore. And we'll see how it responds to that. I know that Torrelusas, you know, there tend to be a coarser foliage than say Shimpaku foliage. So we'll kind of need to just watch it and see what technique works best to get that mature foliage and to keep it around. So going forward, you know, just watch the wire. The wire will probably stay on, honestly, throughout the winter season. I doubt it'll cut in before then, but always watch the growth. It has nothing to do with time. So the amount of time that passes has nothing to do with the wire cutting in. It's the growth on the tree. So you want to watch for excessive growth or strong growth and check the tree accordingly. So other than that, I enjoyed coming out and doing this demo for you guys, as I always do. And I hope you guys enjoyed the program and enjoyed the tree.
Thank you. And I don't know how we do a digital clap, but we'll do it for everyone. Thank you. So we have a second tree to bid, and that's Mike Lane's tree. And we'll start as we did with the pine at a minimum of $100. We're looking for a bid for $100 for a tree that is spectacular.
Catherine?
Catherine?
At 100.
At 100. And we have 125. 125. Looking for a bid for 125. Have a bid for 100.
Mickey, 125.
Nikki.
Mickey, M.I.
Mickey, M.I. Okay, Mickey for 125. 150, anyone? 150.
Joe. Joe from Southwest Florida.
Joe from Southwest Florida is at 150. So we have a bid of 150, looking for 175. This is a beautiful tree. Very unusual, very special.
Mickey, 175.
Okay, Mickey, 175, 175. Looking for 200, 175. We have a bid for 175, looking for 200. We have a bid for 200, 175. Going once.
Troy.
Troy for 200. Troy now has a bid, 200, 225. And we have a bid for 200 by Troy, which is the high bid so far. We're looking for 225. 225. So Mike Lane in the back is ragging with Jason because this tree's already bid for more than Jason's did. I can tell.
Actually, he's dragging on the.
Oh, he's dragging on the flower. Okay, so
Mickey, 225.
Mickey, 225. Mickey, 225. How about 250? Anyone for 250? Mickey for 225. 250? 225 going once. 225 going twice.
Okay, the Casenzas.
Casenzas are 250. Casenzas are 250. 275. Casenzas are at 250. Anyone for 275?
Mickey.
Nikki,
275.
all right, Nikki. Keep going, Nikki. She's at 275. We're looking for three.
Troy, 285.
285 for Troy. 285. 300, anybody? 285 for Troy. Looking for 300.
300 Mickey.
300, Mickey. All right, 300. 325, anyone? 300 for Mickey. 325. Looking for 325. We have a bid for 300 for Mickey, going once, going twice. Sold to Mickey at 300.
What one's Mickey? Okay, one of us is that right?
Okay, great job. Great job, Mickey. We have another tree for you, Mickey. So the Caliandra is a very fast-growing tree. Just in the past 10 minutes, it's grown some wonderful blossoms. This is really amazing. All right, true to form, we'll start the bidding at 100, worth a ton more. We're starting to bid at 100 for the Caliandra. You remember, you could end up by air layering with two beautiful trees. Fast-growing tropical. Lunetta?
100.
We have a bid for 100. Do we have a second bid? For 125.
Joe
100.
at 125.
Who is it?
Joe at 125.
Joe is at 125. We have a bid for 125. We're going to 150. 125. We have a bid. 150. 150. We have a bid for 150. All right. We have a bid for 150. 175. Anyone? 175.
Okay, Troy came in at 152, so I'll do 175.
Okay, so we have, we jumped to 175. We're looking for 200 for the Caliandra, a particularly fast-growing species. This is amazing. So where are we?
175.
So we're at 175. We're looking for $200 at 175. 175 going once. 175 going twice.
Troy bid 200.
Okay, Troy's at 200. Troy is at 200. Looking for 225. Troy is at 200. Looking for 225. 225, anyone? Going once at 200, twice at 200, sold at $200. I would like to particularly thank everyone for a really special event, a fun event, a very educational, informational event. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Ham. Yeah. And thank you, Lindsay. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Lindsay. All right.
Closer. Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Bravo, good job, everybody. Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you, thank you.
Great job. Thank you.
All right.
Leave meeting.
We're gonna end this.
Pam, I'm gonna go ahead and leave the meeting on the phone, or would you want me to stay on?
Well, we're done.
Okay, good. I didn't, know you've got it all recorded?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Meetings are on.